Bech, a Book by John Updike. This book consists of 214 pages and is divided into 7 stories, a foreword, and an appendix. A note about the author. John Updike was born in 1932 in Shillington, Pennsylvania, and attended Harvard College and the Ruskin School of Drawing and Fine Arts in Oxford, England. From 1955 to 1957, he was a staff member of The New Yorker, to which he has contributed stories, essays, and poems. He is the author of 9 books of fiction and 3 of poetry, as well as a collection of essays and 4 small juvenile books. Foreword. Dear John, well, if you must commit the artistic indecency of writing about a writer, better, I suppose, about me than about you. Except, reading along in these, I wonder if it is me, enough me, purely me. At first blush, for example, in Bulgaria, eclectic sexuality, bravura narcissism, thinning curly hair, I sound like some gentlemanly Norman Mailer. Then that London glimpse of silver hair glints more of gallant, glamorous Bello, the king of the leprechauns, than of that stolid old homely yours truly. My childhood seems out of Alex Portnoy, and my ancestral past out of I.B. Singer. I get a whiff of Malamud in your city breezes, and am I paranoid to feel my block an ignoble version of the more or less noble renunciations of H. Roth, D. Fuchs, and J. Salinger? Withal something waspish, theological, scared, and insulatingly ironical that derives, my wild surmise is, from you. Yet you are right. This monotonous hero who embarks from an airplane, mouths words he doesn't quite mean, has vaguely to do with some woman, and gets back on the airplane is certainly one Henry Bech. Until your short yet still not unlongish collection, no revolutionary has concerned himself with our oppression, with the silken mechanism whereby America reduces her writers to imbecility and cousinage. Envied like Negroes, disbelieved in like angels, we veer between the harlotry of the lecture platform and the torture of the writing desk, only to collapse, our 5-and-dime Halloween priest's robes a-rustle with economy-class jet-set tickets and honorary certificates from the Cunt of the Month Club, amid a standing crowd of rueful Lilliputian obituaries. Our language degenerating in the mouths of broadcasters and pop-yellers, our formal designs crumbling like sand castles under the feet of beach bullies, we nevertheless and incredibly support with our desperate efforts. Just now I had to look up desperate in the dictionary for the 99th time, forgetting again if it is spelled with 2 A's or 3 E's. A flourishing culture of publishers, agents, editors, tutors, time nicks, media personnel in all shades of suavity, chic, and sexual gusto. When I think of the matings, the moaning, jubilant fornications between ectomorphic, oversexed junior editors and svelte, hot from Wellesley, majored in English, minored in philosophy, female coffee fetchers and receptionists that have been engineered with the lever of some of my poor, scratched up and pasted over pages, they arrive in the editorial offices as stiff with Elmer's glue as a masturbator's bedsheet. The office boys use them for tea trays. I could mutilate myself like sainted Origen. I could keen like Jeremiah. Thank Yahweh, these bordellos in the sky can soon dispense with the excuse of us entirely. Already the contents of a book count as little as the contents of a breakfast cereal box. It is all a matter of the premium, and the shelf site, and the amount of air between the cornflakes. Never you mind. I'm sure that when, with that blithe, goyish brass I will never cease to grovel at, you approached me for a word or two by way of preface, you were bargaining for a benediction, not a curse. Here it is, then, my blessing. I like some of the things in these accounts very much. The communists are all good people. There is a moment by the sea, I've lost the page, that rang true. Here and there passages seemed over-edited, constipated. You prune yourself too hard. With prose, there is no way to get it out, I have found, but to let it run. I liked some of the women you gave me, and a few of the jokes. By the way, I never, unlike retired light verse writers, make puns. But if you... Here followed a list of suggested deletions, falsifications, suppressions, and rewordings, all of which have been scrupulously incorporated. Editor. I don't suppose your publishing this little jeu of a book will do either of us drastic harm. Henry Bech, Manhattan, December 4th to 12th, 1969. Rich in Russia. Students, not unlike yourselves, compelled to buy paperback copies of his novels, notably the first, Travel Light, though there has lately been some academic interest in his more surreal and existential, and perhaps even anarchist, second novel, Brother Pig, or encountering some essay from When the Saints in a shiny, heavy anthology of mid-century literature costing $12.50, imagine that Henry Bech, like thousands less famous than he, is rich. He is not. The paperback rights to Travel Light were sold by his publisher outright for $2,000, of which the publisher kept $1,000 and Bech's agent $100, 10% of 50%. To be fair, the publisher had had to remainder a third of the modest hardcover printing, and when Travel Light was enjoying its vogue as the post-Golding, pre-Tolkien fad of college undergraduates, would amusingly tell on himself the story of Bech's given-away rights at sales meetings upstairs in 21. As to anthologies, the average permission fee, when it arrives at Bech's mailbox, has been eroded to $64.73 or some such suspiciously odd sum, which barely covers the cost of a restaurant meal with his mistress and a medium wine. Though Bech and his too numerous interviewers have made a quixotic virtue of his continuing to live for 20 years in a grim if roomy Riverside Drive apartment building, the mailbox, students should know, where his pitifully nibbled checks arrive, has been well scarred by floating urban wrath, and his last name has been so often ball-pointed by playful lobby loiterers into a somewhat assonant verb that Bech has left the nameplate space blank and depends upon the clairvoyance of mailmen. He in truth lives there because he cannot afford to leave. He was rich just once in his life, and that was in Russia in 1964, a thaw or so ago. Russia, in those days, like everywhere else, was a slightly more innocent place. Khrushchev, freshly deposed, had left an atmosphere almost comical, of warmth, of a certain fitful openness, of inscrutable experiment and oblique possibility. There seemed no overweening reason why Russia and America, those lovable paranoid giants, could not happily share a globe so big and blue. There certainly seemed no reason why Henry Bech, the recherché but amiable novelist, artistically blocked but socially fluent, should not be flown into Moscow at the expense of our State Department for a month of that mostly imaginary activity termed cultural exchange. Entering the Aeroflot plane at Le Bourget, Bech thought it smelled like his uncle's back rooms in Williamsburg, of swaddled body heat and proximate potatoes boiling. The impression lingered all month. Russia seemed Jewish to him, and of course he seemed Jewish to Russia. He never knew how much of the tenderness and hospitality he met related to his race. His contact man at the American Embassy, a prissy, doleful ex-basketball player from Wisconsin with the all-star name of Skip Reynolds, assured him that 2 out of every 3 Soviet intellectuals had suppressed a Jew in their ancestry. And once Bech did find himself in a Moscow apartment whose bookcases were lined with photographs of Kafka, Einstein, Freud, Wittgenstein, pointedly evoking the glory of pre-Hitlerian Judenkultur. His hosts, both man and wife, were professional translators, and the apartment was bewilderingly full of kin, including a doe-eyed young hydraulics engineer and a grandmother who had been a dentist with the Red Army, and whose dental chair dominated the parlor. For a whole long toasty evening, Jewishness, perhaps also pointedly, was not mentioned. The subject was one Bech was happy to ignore. His own writing had sought to reach out from the ghetto of his heart toward the wider expanses across the Hudson. The artistic triumph of American Jewry lay, he thought, not in the novels of the 50s, but in the movies of the 30s. Those gargantuan, crass contraptions whereby Jewish brains projected Gentile stars upon a Gentile nation, and out of their own immigrant joy gave a formless land dreams and even a kind of conscience. The reservoir of faith in 1964 was just going dry. Through depression and world convulsion, the country had been sustained by the Arriviste patriotism of Louis B. Mayer and the brothers Warner. To Bech, it was one of history's great love stories, the mutually profitable romance between Jewish Hollywood and bohunk America, conducted almost entirely in the dark, a tapping of fervent messages through the wall of the San Gabriel Range. And his favorite Jewish writer was the one who turned his back on his 3 beautiful Brooklyn novels and went into the desert to write scripts for Doris Day. This may be, except for graduate students, neither here nor there. There in Russia, 5 years ago, when Cuba had been taken out of the oven to cool and Vietnam was still coming to a simmer, Bech did find a quality of life, impoverished yet ceremonial, shabby yet ornate, sentimental, embattled, and avuncular, reminiscent of his neglected Jewish past. Virtue in Russia, as in his childhood, seemed something that arose from men, like a comforting body odor, rather than something from above, that impaled the struggling soul like a moth on a pin. He stepped from the Aeroflot plane with its notably hefty stewardesses into an atmosphere of generosity. They met him with arms heaped with cold roses. On the first afternoon, the Writers' Union gave him as expense money a stack of ruble notes, pink and lilac Lenin and powder blue Spasskaya Tower. In the following month, in the guise of royalties, in honor of his coming, they had translated Travel Light and several of his commentary essays, MGM in the USA, The Moth on the Pin, Daniel Fuchs, An Appreciation, had appeared in Inostranная Literatura, but since no copyright agreements pertained, the royalties were arbitrarily calculated like showers of manna. More rubles were given to him, so that by the week of his departure, Bech had accumulated over 1,400 rubles, by the official exchange rate, $1,540. There was nothing to spend it on. All his hotels, his plane fares, his meals were paid for. He was a guest of the Soviet state. From morning to night, he was never alone. That first afternoon, he had also been given, along with the rubles, a companion, a translator escort, Yekaterina Alexandrovna Ryleeva. She was a notably thin, red-headed woman with a flat chest and paper-colored skin, and a translucent wart above her left nostril. He grew to call her Kate. Kate, he said, displaying his rubles in 2 fistfuls, letting some drift to the floor, I have robbed the proletariat. What can I do with my filthy loot? He had developed in this long time in which she was always with him a clowning, super-American manner that disguised all complaints as acts. In response, she had strengthened her original pose of schoolteacherish patience with ageless peasant roots. Her normal occupation was translating English-language science fiction into Ukrainian, and he imagined this month with him was relatively a holiday. She had a mother, and late at night, after accompanying him to a morning brandy session with the editors of Unists, to lunch at the Writers' Union with its shark-mouthed chairman, to Dostoevsky's childhood home next to a madhouse, and enshrining some agonized, cross-hatched manuscripts and a pair of oval tin spectacles, tiny as if fashioned for a dormouse, a museum of folk art, an endless restaurant meal, and a night of ballet, Yekaterina would bring Bech to his hotel lobby, put a babushka over her bushy orange hair, and head into a blizzard toward this ailing mother. Bech wondered about Kate's sex life. Skip Reynolds solemnly told him that personal life in Russia was inscrutable. He also told Bech that Kate was undoubtedly a party spy. Bech was touched, and wondered what in him would be worth spying out. From infancy on, we are all spies. The shame is not this, but that the secrets to be discovered are so paltry and few. Yekaterina was perhaps as old as 40, which could just give her a lover killed in the war. Was this the secret of her vigil, the endless paper-colored hours she spent by his side? She was always translating for him, and this added to her neutrality and transparence. He, too, had never been married and imagined that this was what marriage was like. She answered, "Henry." She usually touched his arm, saying his name, and it never ceased to thrill him a little, the way the H became a breathy guttural sound between G and K. "You must not joke. This is your money. You earned it by the sweat of your brain. All over Soviet Union, committees of people sit in discussion over travel light. Its wonderful qualities. The printing of 100,000 copies has gone poof in the bookstores." The comic strip colors of science fiction tinted her idiom unexpectedly. "Poof," Bech said, and scattered the money above his head. Before the last bill stopped fluttering, they both stooped to retrieve the rubles from the rich red carpet. They were in his room at the Sovietskaya, the hotel for party bigwigs and important visitors. All the suites were furnished in high Tsarist style, chandeliers, wax fruit, and brass bears. "We have banks here," Kate said shyly, reaching under the satin sofa, "as in the capitalist countries. They pay interest. You could deposit your money in such a bank. It would be here, enlarged, when you returned. You would have a numbered bank book." "What?" said Bech, "and help support the socialist state? When you are already years ahead of us in the space race. I would be adding thrust to your rockets." They stood up, both a little breathless from exertion, betraying their age. The tip of her nose was pink. She passed the remainder of his fortune into his hands. Her silence seemed embarrassed. "Besides," Bech said, "when would I ever return?" She offered, "Perhaps in a space warp." Her shyness, her pink nose and carroty hair, her embarrassment were becoming oppressive. He brusquely waved his arms. "No, Kate, we must spend it. Spend! Spend! It's the Keynesian way. We will make Mother Russia a consumer society." From the very still, slightly tipped way she was standing, Bech, bothered by space warp, received a haunted impression that she was locked into a colorless other dimension from which only the pink tip of her nose emerged. "Is not so simple," she ominously pronounced. For one thing, time was running out. Babochka and Mishkin, the two writers' union officials in charge of Bech's itinerary, had crowded the end of his schedule with compulsory cultural events. Fortified by relatively leisured weeks in Kazakhstan and the Caucasus, Bech was deemed fit to endure a marathon of war movies. The hero of one of them had lost his Communist Party member's card, which was worse than losing your driver's license, and in another, a young soldier hitched rides in a maze of trains only to turn around at the end. "See, Henry," Kate whispered to him, "now he is home. That is his mother. What a good face, so much suffering. Now they kiss. Now he must leave. Oh," and Kate was crying too much to translate further. And museums and shrines and brandy with various writers who uniformly adored Gamingway. November was turning bitter. The Christmassy lights celebrating the revolution had been taken down. Kate, as they hurried from appointment to appointment, had developed a sniffle. She constantly patted her nose with a handkerchief. Bech felt a guilty pang sending her off into the cold toward her mother before he ascended to his luxurious hotel room with its parquetred foyer stacked with gift books, and its alabaster bathroom, and its great brocaded double bed. He would drink from a gift bottle of Georgian brandy and stand by the window, looking down on the golden windows of an apartment building where young Russians were twisting to Voice of America tapes. Chubby Checker's chicken plucker voice carried distinctly across the crevasse of subarctic night. In an adjoining window, a couple, courteously granted isolation by the others, was making love. He could see knees and hands, and then a rhythmically kicking ankle. To relieve the pressure, Bech would sit down with his brandy and write to distant women boozy, reminiscent letters that in the morning would be handed solemnly to the ex-basketball player to be sent out of Russia via diplomatic pouch. Reynolds, himself something of a spy, was with them whenever Bech spoke to a group, as of translators. When asked who was America's best living writer, Bech said Nabokov, and there was quite a silence before the next question. Or of students, whom he assured that Yevtushenko's precocious autobiography was a salubrious and patriotic work that instead of being banned, should be distributed free to Soviet schoolchildren. Did I put my foot in it? Bech would ask anxiously afterward. Another act. The American's careful mouth twitched. It's good for them. Shock therapy. You are charming, Yekaterina Alexandrovna always said loyally, jealously interposing herself and squeezing Bech's arm. She could not imagine that Bech did not, like herself, loathe all officials. She would not have believed that Bech approached this one with an intellectual's reverence for the athlete, and that they exchanged in private not anti-Kremlin poison, but literary gossip and pro-football scores, love letters and old copies of Time. Now, in her campaign to keep them apart, Kate had been given another weapon. She squeezed his arm smugly and said, "We have an hour. We must rush off and shop." For the other thing, there was not much to buy. To begin, he would need an extra suitcase. He and Yekaterina, in their chauffeured Zil, drove to what seemed to Bech a far suburb, past flickerings of birch forest, to sections of new housing, perforated warehouses the color of wet cement. Here they found a vast store, vast though each salesgirl ruled as a petty tyrant over her domain of shelves. There was a puzzling duplication of suitcase sections. Each displayed the same squarish mountain of dark cardboard boxes, and each pouting princess responded with negative insouciance to Yekaterina's quest for a leather suitcase. "I know there have been some," she told Bech. "It doesn't matter," he said. "I want a cardboard one. I love the metal studs and the little chocolate handle." "You have fun with me," she said. "I know what you have in the West. I have been to Science Fiction Writers' Congress in Vienna. This great store and not one leather suitcase. It is a disgrace upon the people. But come, I know another store." They went back into the Zil, which smelled like a cloakroom, and in whose swaying, stuffy depths Bech felt squeamish and chastened, having often been sent to the cloakroom as a child at PS 87 on West 77th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. A dozen stuffy miles and 3 more stores failed to produce a leather suitcase. At last, Kate permitted him to buy a paper one, the biggest, with gay plaid sides, and as long as an oboe. To console her, he also bought an Astrakhan hat. It was not flattering. When he put it on, the haughty salesgirl laughed aloud, and did not cover his ears, which were cold, but it had the advantage of costing 54 rubles. "Only a bayar," said Kate, excited to flirtation by his purchase, "would wear such a wow of a hat." "I look like an Armenian in it," Bech said. Humiliations never come singly. On the street, with his suitcase and hat, Bech was stopped by a man who wanted to buy his overcoat. Kate translated and then scolded. During what Bech took to be a lengthy threat to call the police, the offender, a morose, red-nosed man costumed like a New York chestnut vendor, stared stubbornly at the sidewalk by their feet. As they moved away, he said in soft English to Bech, "Your shoes. I give 40 rubles." Bech pulled out his wallet and said, "Niet, niet. For your shoes I give 50. Kate, with a squawk, flew between them and swept Bech away. She told him in tears, "Had the authorities witnessed that scene, we would all be put in jail. Biff bang!" Bech had never seen her cry in daylight, only in the dark of projection rooms. He climbed into the Zeal, feeling especially sick and guilty. They were late for their luncheon, with a cherubic museum director and his hatchet-faced staff. In the course of their tour through the museum, Bech tried to cheer her up with praise of socialist realism. "Look at that turbine. Nobody in America can paint a turbine like that, not since the 30s. Every part so distinct you could rebuild one from it, yet the whole thing romantic as a sunset. Mimesis. You can't beat it." He was honestly fond of these huge posterish oils. They reminded him of magazine illustrations from his adolescence. Kate would not be cheered. "It is stupid stuff," she said. "We have had no painters since Rublev. You treat my country as a picnic." Sometimes her English had a weird precision. "It is not as if there is no talent. We are great. There are millions. The young are burning up with talent. It is annihilating them." She pronounced it annihil, a word she had met only in print, connected with ray guns. "Kate, I mean it," Bech insisted, hopelessly in the wrong, as with a third-grade teacher, yet also subject to another pressure, that of a woman taking sensual pleasure in refusing to be consoled. "I'm telling you, there is artistic passion here. This bicycle, beautiful impressionism, no spokes. The French paint apples, the Russians paint bicycles." The parallel came out awry, unkind. Grimly patting her pink nostrils, Yekaterina passed into the next room. "Once," she informed him, "this room held entirely pictures of him. At least that is no more." Bech did not need to ask who he was. The undefined pronoun had a constant value. In Georgia, Bech had been shown a tombstone for a person described simply as mother. The next day, between lunch with Voznesensky and dinner with Yevtushenko, who both flatteringly seemed to concede to him a hemispheric celebrity equivalent to their own, and who feigned enchantment when he tried to explain his peculiar status as not a lion, with a lion's confining burden of symbolic portent, but as a graying, furtively stylish rat, indifferently permitted to gnaw and roam behind the wainscoting of a fire trap about to be demolished anyway. He and Kate and the impassive chauffeur managed to buy 3 amber necklaces and 4 wooden toys and 2 very thin wristwatches. The amber seemed homely to Bech, melted butter refrozen, but Kate was proud of it.